Ever imagine your brain pulling off a self-repair, like actually fixing itself? We're diving into a medical mystery today that sounds like something straight out of sci-fi. Aneurysms in the brain that might be able to heal on their own.
It's a real phenomenon. It's called spontaneous thrombosis, basically. The aneurysm forms a blood clot naturally and ends up sealing itself off.
So to unpack this, we're going deep into a recent study called, get this, Hemodynamics of Thrombus Formation in Intracranial Aneurysms. And they use some seriously cool tech. We're talking 109 virtual patients.
Yeah, that's right. They combined a ton of real medical data with some really advanced computer modeling to basically create a testing ground where they can study how blood flows inside these aneurysms.
Okay, that's way more high-tech than what I was picturing. But before we get too far into virtual patients, let's make sure everyone listening is on the same page. Could you give us a quick reminder what exactly is an aneurysm and why should we even care if they're spontaneously clotting?
Of course. So imagine a garden hose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the blood vessels in your brain are kind of like that. An aneurysm is like this weak spot in the hose that balloons outward. The real danger is if that balloon bursts, that's a ruptured aneurysm, and it can be life-threatening.
Okay, yeah, that makes it crystal clear why we're so interested in any chance of them healing themselves. So how common is this spontaneous thrombosis thing? Can we all just relax and assume our brains have this handled?
Well, not quite. But one of the big things this research tackled was figuring out just how often this happens. And it turns out it's more common than you might think, especially as those aneurysms get bigger.
Yeah, you're going to have to give us some numbers here. How much more common are we talking?
Okay, so think about it this way. For larger aneurysms, they found a spontaneous thrombosis rate of about 24%. But here's the really interesting part for giant aneurysms. Over half of them showed at least some degree of natural clotting.
Over half? Wow, I had no idea it was that frequent. So it sounds aneurysm size is a major factor in whether it can pull off this self-healing trick.
Absolutely. Size really matters. Imagine the difference between a still pond and a rushing river.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this.
In a still pond, you're more likely to see, debris and stuff accumulate, right? Things settle and stick around. It's kind of similar inside a larger aneurysm. The blood flow is slower, and it creates like the perfect conditions for a clot to form.
So a smaller aneurysm is like that rushing river you mentioned. Things are moving too fast for clots to form easily.
Exactly. And they actually look at the shape of the aneurysms too. What they found is that aneurysms that are taller than they are wide picture, like a long, thin balloon. Those were also more prone to clotting.
So it's not just about how big the aneurysm is, it's also the shape of that balloon and how that affects the blood flow inside. Can you give us a real-world example of how this shape thing comes into play?
Sure. Think about filling a balloon with water. If the balloon has a narrow opening, it fills slowly.
Yeah.
And the water inside is pretty still, right? But if you have a wide opening, the water rushes in, fills it quickly, and there's a lot more movement. That's a lot like what's happening inside these different aneurysm shapes.
Okay, that's a fantastic visual. So we've got size, we've got shape, but I have a feeling there's always more to the story, right? What about something like blood pressure? Does that factor into an aneurysm's ability to heal itself?
You're absolutely right. There's always another layer to peel back. And you've hit on a big one, blood pressure. You'd think, right, that high blood pressure would make spontaneous thrombosis more likely. More pressure, more force. Seems like it would kind of push that clotting process along.
That's exactly what I would have thought. It seems pretty intuitive.
Yeah, it does. But this is where the research takes a really fascinating turn. It actually suggests that high blood pressure might make spontaneous thrombosis a little bit less likely.
Wait, really? Now that is unexpected. Why would that be?
Well, it all comes back to those blood flow patterns we were talking about. What the study found is that while high blood pressure does increase the overall, force of the blood flow, it also makes things more turbulent inside the aneurysm.
So instead of that calm, slow flow that seems like it'd be ideal for clotting, you've got more of a, chaotic, swirling situation going on.
Exactly. That turbulence seems to really mess with the clotting process. Think about trying to build a house of cards in a windstorm.
Okay, yeah, that's a great analogy. Not going to happen. So high blood pressure, less likely to clot. But how did the researchers actually figure this out? Didn't you say they looked at a specific example?
Yeah. They used their model, their simulation, to look at a 51-year-old woman with what's called a basilar tip aneurysm. Basically, they recreated her aneurysm in the computer so they could analyze the blood flow under both normal and high-pressure conditions.
And what happened? Did her virtual aneurysm clot differently?
Remember how we were talking about those two key factors that influence clotting residence time and shear rate?
Right.
Well, the simulation showed that with high blood pressure, The residence time of the blood in the aneurysm didn't really change that much,
Yeah.
but the shear rate, that increased a lot.
Okay, time for a quick refresher. What exactly do those terms mean again?
Happy to clarify. So residence time is basically how long, on average, a blood cell kind of hangs out inside the aneurysm before it moves along. The longer it lingers, the more chance it has to, like, stick around and maybe trigger a clot.
Okay, that makes sense. And shear rate, that's all about force, right?
Right. It's basically how much force the blood is putting on the aneurysm walls as it flows through.
Yeah.
Imagine like a gentle stream versus a raging torrent. The torrent, the one with the higher shear rate, is going to put a lot more stress and strain on the riverbed over time.
Okay, I see. That makes sense. So in this patient's case, high blood pressure meant higher shear rate, more force on those aneurysm walls.
Exactly. And that increased force just seemed to make it harder for those clots to form and stay put. Now, it's important to remember this is just one example. More research is definitely needed to know if this holds true for everyone. But it definitely challenges what we thought we knew and opens up some really fascinating possibilities.
It definitely does.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from virtual patients to blood flow patterns to this really surprising link between high blood pressure and clotting. But before we get too far into the details, I want to pull back for a second. Why does any of this matter? Why should someone listening who might have an aneurysm or knows someone who does care about these findings?
Well, I mean, this is all about understanding how the brain might be able to heal itself, right? Like right now, if someone has an aneurysm, the treatments could be pretty intense surgery, putting in a coil to block it off. But what if we could work with the brain's natural abilities instead?
That's the ultimate goal, right? Instead of these, invasive procedures, what if we could encourage the body to just take care of it itself? And this research is giving us some really important clues on how to potentially do that. That's incredible. Like, we're on the verge of a whole new approach to treating aneurysms. But like you said before, with every answer, we uncover more questions, right? What's the biggest mystery you're left with? What's the one thing you wish you knew right now about how this all works?
What I find so intriguing is that we still don't have a complete picture of what's happening at the microscopic level inside the aneurysm. We're starting to pinpoint the key factors, but how do they all work together? It's like we've got these few pieces of a giant jigsaw puzzle, but like a lot of the middle is still missing.
So it's not as simple as big aneurysm, there's going to be a clot, or high blood pressure, no clot. There's a lot more nuance going on, right?
Exactly. And that's where things get really exciting. Imagine if we could develop this like deep understanding of all the factors. We're talking specific proteins in the blood, how stretchy or stiff the aneurysm wall is, even someone's genes. And if that makes them more prone to this kind of self-healing. If we could unlock that code, it could completely change how we figure out who's at risk and even develop treatments that are tailored to each person's aneurysm.
It's like personalized medicine for the brain. We could know ahead of time which aneurysms are going to need us to intervene and which ones might just need a little nudge in the right direction to heal on their own. That is incredible.
It is incredible. And it's not science fiction. This research is a huge step towards making that a reality. And I think it just highlights how remarkable our bodies are. Even when faced with something as potentially dangerous as an aneurysm, our brains have this incredible ability to protect themselves.
There's a powerful reminder that our bodies can do amazing things if we take the time to understand them. So for everyone listening, here's a question to ponder. What if the future of treating brain aneurysms is less about these complicated procedures and more about working with the brain's own ability to heal? It's a question that I think gives us a lot of hope for even more life-changing medical breakthroughs in the future. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive into the world of science and discovery. We'll be back next time with more.